Okay, so thank you all for coming. Lovely to see you all. Um, for this lecture, there's kind of a little warm up. And what I want to do at the kind of opening bit here is, basically this and the next two lectures are all very tightly interconnected. And to get a run up for how they're interconnected, we get to do more grammar. Yay! So this is actually going to be English grammar, which is even worse than FOL grammar. So the core idea here is really that English sentences at their core, not everyone, but at their core, are subject-predicate sentences, right? So you have a subject that is the thing the sentence is about, and then the predicate is sort of what it's doing or what quality you're ascribing to it, or et cetera, right? So Socrates is wise, the predicate is wise, is attached to the subject of the sentence, Socrates. Right? Now, the overarching metaphysical picture that many people buy into is that the grammatical structure here, and note this isn't just something strictly in English, right? Dutch, German, French, in fact, almost every natural language has this sort of subject-predicate structure. And the overarching metaphysical picture that people kind of buy into is that the world's structure is roughly parallel to this. That is, when we think about the constituents of the world, the things that are out there are objects, right? These are things, particulars, individuals. And then there are properties. Properties are like ways things could be, qualities, what's shared. Roughly, these correspond. Objects are what's picked out or expressed by the subject things, and properties are what's expressed by predicates. Again, not everybody buys this, but there's a kind of the vast majority of things. And note, the kinds of things that will count as objects are basically any individual objects. Any things that we could have shoved into a domain if we're thinking about an FOL.
So object is a subject?
Yeah. So again, subject here just is grammatical subject, right? It just means kind of the thing that's doing the verb or that the adjective is attached to, right? It's the subject of the sentence, not subject in the kind of more substantive, like has a perspective kind of way. Literally just subject predicate here, we're talking pure grammar. So we have this grammatical distinction, and then there's an idea of like, okay, let's use this grammatical distinction to think about a metaphysical distinction. The next 3 weeks are going to concern this very broad picture. Always nice to see a typo right in the very first line of the second slide. Predicts. Right. So the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about stuff that kind of center around this subject-predicate leading to a metaphysical division. Today, we're going to talk about properties, the thing that's supposed to be picked out by or expressed by predicates. What are properties? Should we think that they exist? And if they do, what kind of thing are they? So that's what we're going to do today. Then next week, what we're going to do is talk about the subject part. Right? We're going to talk about how singular terms denote or refer to the individual objects that they pick out. This is actually something we talked a little bit about in the first half of the course, the difference between names and definite descriptions. But we're going to talk about the underlying mechanics in natural language. And then finally, we're going to kind of extend this by thinking about one very special predicate. And that very special predicate is going to be identity. Right? We're going to think about what distinguishes one individual object from another. That is, how does identity work? And the big thing for us is going to be, what's the relationship between identity and satisfying predicates? So that's what we're going to build to. But all of this kind of centers around this very broad, to go back a slide, very broad idea of a grammatical structure telling us something about worldly structure. Okay. So our aim for today, sorry, was that a question?
Identity as an equal to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember in FOL, we had the very special identity predicate. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, is there a way to kind of understand that in a kind of metaphysical sense? So our aim for today is going to be to cover this material. Right? I forgot to ask about the structure. Is everyone okay if we aim for going for a bit and then break? Just because I'll need to take a break to cough. So what I want to start with is by talking to you about some kind of background ideas. First, the general idea of what properties are meant to be, as well as some kind of background concepts and notions. Then I want to look at 3 arguments for the existence of properties. Now, notably, these 3 arguments aren't meant to tell us what properties are, just that we ought to include them in our ontology in some way. So, our first thing is, again, kind of getting some background, conceptual clearing ground. Then we're going to have 3 arguments for the existence of properties. And then we're going to look at 2 kinds of responses. So, first we're going to look at realism about properties, which unhelpfully isn't actually realism about properties. It says properties exist, but importantly, it also says properties exist and they are these special kinds of things. They are universals. So they exist and they're these. And then we'll contrast this with a nominalist position. Nominalists, some of them say properties exist, but they just turn out to be other kinds of individuals. They're nothing special. And then there's another brand of nominalist that says, no, fuck that, properties don't exist. There are no such things.
Should I see it as predicates are the is-wise and properties are the wise?
Yes. So effectively, this is what we're going to talk about in just a second, right? Properties are, again, what's kind of expressed by the predicate. If there's anything the predicate picks out, it will be the property. Okay, so that's the plan. Again, we're going to kind of get to, if we can get to the first 2 sections before the break, we'll be doing good. Then we can talk about ways to kind of go from there. Okay, so what are properties? The basic idea. Properties are meant to be entities, things in some very broad sense of thing. Importantly, they're meant to have a lot of different features. Properties are entities that can be predicated of other objects. So it doesn't make sense to kind of predicate Nathan to something, but we can predicate things like is wise, is Dutch, is red. You can attach those. They can stand in the predicate position, whereas Nathan cannot. Socrates cannot. The kinds of things they're meant to be intuitively: attributes, qualities, features, characteristics, types. Is a tiger is a predicate. So being a tiger is meant to be a property. There are ways things are, or ways things could be. Is a basketball player. Is a Tilburger. To go along with the first one, we can also say they're entities that things exemplify or instantiate. Is a true Scotsman. Kind of are an instance of. It doesn't really make sense to say, oh, this is an instance of Socrates. You would just say, this is Socrates. But you could say, this is an instance of an ancient Greek philosopher. He's an example of one. He's a case of one.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So this, we'll characterize this with some terminology on the next slide. But yeah, one of the things that we're going to keep coming back to is this sort of general idea of what a property is. And the really basic thought is properties are meant to be the kinds of things that objects share in. So take my jacket, your jacket, their sweaters, the desktops, things like this, all the black things in the room, all the things that have that color. The property is, if there is anything that's shared, it is the thing that is shared. So is black is the property that is exemplified by all of the black things in the room. Is Dutch is a property that's exemplified by everyone in the room who's Dutch. Again, do we see the kind of idea? Contrast that with Nathan. Well, Nathan isn't something that's exemplified. It's just another way to talk about this thing. Now, you might build a predicate, is Nathan, or Nathanizes. And then there's an instance of that. But I am not that property. I'm an instance of that property. So again, this is the kind of broad idea, right? Properties are these sort of, if there's anything shared, it's what's shared. It's the qualities things have. It's the ways things are. Right? It's what it could be exemplified or instantiated. The debate about what properties are, and if there are any such things, this has been a central and long-running debate in Western philosophy. Everyone familiar with Plato's theory of the forms? I presume David has talked to you guys about this already. Has this come up? Okay. Plato's theory of the forms is an account of what properties are. Yeah, it might be you haven't come across this in other, sorry. Plato's theory of the forms is an account of what properties are. In fact, we're going to talk about it in just like in the second half of this lecture. It's a theory about, hey, what is it that everything that's a triangle shares in? The form of triangularness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you get that idea, you've already gotten what we want. Okay, so that's the kind of general idea of what properties are. Now, again, to kind of help, we can think about some other notions, some other kind of clarifications. And the first thing we can do, clarification-wise, is looking at the box up there, we can ask, how many letters are in the box? And there's at least two good answers. Right? One of them is, there's 2 letters in the box, A and B. And the other is, there's 4 letters in the box, A, B, and B. And both of them are right. It just depends on what you're counting. The difference here is thinking in terms of type or in terms of token. Type is the particular kind or form. Right? And the form might be repeatable. In contrast, token is a specific particular instance. Right? So if we say there's 2 letters in the box, which one are we counting in terms of?
That's less. A, B.
And we're talking in terms of types, right? We're talking in terms of types. If we say there's 2 letters in the box, we're talking about the types. Right? And if we say there's 4, we're talking about token.
Is this the amount of properties it has? Or?
This is just kind of background stuff, right? So again, this distinction between type and token, this is going to come up in other places, but I want you, it's useful for us to talk about the nature of properties. Right? Because one of the things we'll want to talk about is the property is something like the type that every token shares. But again, this general distinction between type and token, know it, love it, it's going to come up a lot. Please.
Maybe a weird question. I understand what you're telling me, but what is a token? I thought it was a coin.
So the nice thing is, actually, the token gets it from this. It is a particular instance, right? So you have, a bunch of different tokens. That is a bunch of instances of the coin that you need.
Yeah. I just didn't understand that.
That's a beautiful case, right? So how many coins do you have in your pocket? Well, I've got 3 pennies. So in one sense, just one. That's a really weird way to count coins, right? We count coins in terms of tokens. Yeah. But again, we have the general differences. Okay. Another big lurking conceptual difference, and this is about kinds of properties or kinds of types, is determinables versus determinants. So the terminology here is confusing, but the thing to remember, determinable is something that can be determined. That is, it is a general type. And a determinant is a specific subtype. Right? So color is a determinable. Red, blue, green are different determinants. Right? Different ways to kind of specify. Mammal is a determinable. Tiger is a determinant. Bengal tiger is a determinant of the determinable tiger. So the important thing here is, right, when you think about it as the general type that could be further specified, it is able to be determined. It is a determinable. And when you think of the specific subtype, it is a determinant. And now, depending on where you're looking, a category could be one or the other. The example on the slide is being red. Red is both a determinant for being a color, but also a determinable because there's lots of different shades of red. Being a tiger is a determinant of being a mammal, and a determinable because you could be like a Bengal tiger or an Asian tiger or a snow, I'm not sure, what are the other ones? Snow tiger, etc., etc., etc. Yeah.
So then can a determinable also be determinable like other?
So again, think about red, right? It can be both. It depends on the level of specificity you're after.
So determinables are a subset of determinants.
Other way around.
Determinants are a subset of determinables.
Yeah. So here's the way to think about it, right? Color is the big one, and then what you do is like, okay, here's the red things, here's the blue things, here's the green things, here's the yellow things, there's the purple.
Yep.
Right? Each little subset, proper subset, is going to be the determinant.
Okay, yeah.
Etc., etc., etc. So again, determinable is the big one. It is able to be further specified, and the further specification is the determinant. Please.
Could you then say that a type is a determinable and a token is a determinant?
Nice. Yes. That would be at least one way to kind of think about this, right? Notably, I would be happy with that. Some people wouldn't, because you might think that this is only the sort of thing that should be applied to types. So what you might say is, okay, the smallest possible type is the one instance type. So remember how I said Nathan isn't a kind of predicable, but is Nathan is? Cool. Let's have that as a determinant of some very specific chain. That'd be a way to capture that idea. Yes. So good. Yes.
Is there also a correlation between logical and necessary? Like determined is like necessary and like determinable is like logical? Possibly logical.
It's not far off from something like this. It's the same kind of broadly hierarchical structure.
Yeah.
But importantly, when we're thinking about the kind of logical necessity to other strings, that was specifically kind of carving up modal space. And here it's literally just carving up the space of any possible things at all. So we're just thinking about like, hey, ways you might specify things. You could do it in a very broad way or in more narrow ways. Cool. Okay. So again, types and tokens, determinants and determinables, these are all kind of conceptual things in the background for cases about properties. The last big distinction I want to make, and this we jokingly talked about it this morning, is about abstract versus concrete objects. So abstract versus concrete, exactly how to draw this distinction is contested. The broad idea is hopefully graspable. Concrete objects exist in space and time. They can stand in causal relations, either causing things or being caused by things. They can in principle be perceived. The in principle here is doing a lot of work. Right? They're subject to change, or at least potentially subject to change. And again, I made the bad joke, no one knew the song, right? They can pass the Q-tip test, right? Can I kick it? If you can say yes, you can. then it's concrete, at least in some sense of can you. Contrast that with abstract objects, abstract entities. Abstract entities are not located in space and time. They exist in some other place. You'll be listening to the song. Right. Now note, when I say they exist in some other place, importantly, this doesn't mean that they exist in our heads. In fact, they exist in some realm of the abstracta. Our heads are in some sense still kind of concrete. Or at least there's some kind of causal association. Abstract objects are completely detached from the world.
Can we imagine abstract objects, or are they just what we know should theoretically be there, but we cannot see?
Better the latter than the first, right? We might be able to imagine, and that imagining kind of corresponds to ones that are out there, if they are, but it's better to think about them as they're just these things that exist in this weird abstracty heaven, and they're either there or they're not. So, actually, the notion, this distinction comes from Frege. He talks about the meanings of words and sentences existing in this abstract realm. He unfortunately called it the third realm. Notably, Frege is German. So think about how you would express third realm in German. He was writing at a time that didn't quite have the negative connotation that it does now, but still. So, importantly, abstract objects. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So abstract objects don't exist in space and time. They don't stand in causal relations, because they're just sort of out in Platonic heaven. Right? They can't be directly perceived. We might see instances of them, but you see the instance, not the abstract object itself. And this is debatable, but arguably they don't change. They're not mutable, at least not intrinsically. Maybe we can change them by kind of erasing an instance of them, but that's not changing the abstract entity itself. Again, these are nebulous, and that's partially just because exactly how to draw this distinction is debated. But do we kind of get the grip here?
Do you have an example?
Of an abstract object? The number 2. Right? It seems like if numbers exist, they're the kind of thing that are purely abstract. I mean, this is a representation of the number 2, but it is not the number.
Oh yeah.
Right? I mean, the idea is if every instance of this went away, every pair of things went away, we only had one thing left, the number would still be there.
Yeah.
That's the kind of idea. Right? So we can contrast this numeral, this thing that I just wrote, which is a concrete object, with what it represents, which is arguably an abstract object.
Thank you.
No, it's good. Good question. So again, this is kind of abstract concrete distinction. This is going to come up when we think about what properties are.
Is every number then an abstract entity? Instead if you have a token with it.
Yes. Right. So every numeral, every way we would write it down, concrete, because we're writing it down, right? But what it represents, if it exists, is plausibly an abstract object. Yeah. That's good. Another abstract object, very plausibly, something we've seen already. Plausibly, yeah, the null set. The null set is plausibly an abstract object. It doesn't depend on any concrete object as a member. So it's just kind of, if it exists, it's just there in abstract heaven, doing its thing, which is nothing. Right? Again, specific instances we can kind of debate, and there is a lot of debate about what counts and what doesn't count. But yeah, yes?
The null set is not the same as an empty set, right? Because it's different from
The null set and the empty set, that's 2 ways to talk about the same thing. Right? It's just to say it's the set with no members. Yeah. Okay, again, the cheap and cheery way to contrast this is if it's in space and time and stands in causal relations, it's concrete. If it's not in space and time, doesn't stand in causal relations, it is abstract. Rough and ready. So this distinction is going to come back when we think about what kinds of things properties might be. Okay. Excuse me. All right. I got this wrong. One last thing before we get to the arguments for properties is something that we've actually come across and talked about implicitly, but not made explicit. And there's this idea of Occam's razor. Have people heard this or come across this notion before? So Occam's razor, as it's often expressed, is that entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. Or, to put in other terms, don't commit yourself to more than you absolutely need to.
Can you explain the razor?
Yeah. So the thought is, let's put it in terms of ontological commitments. Right? Your ontological commitments, according to the razor, should be only those things that you absolutely need. Don't commit yourself to more than that. If you can get away with committing just to objects A, B, and C, don't believe in object D too. It's redundant. It doesn't do anything for you. Shave it off. That's the idea. So entities shouldn't be multiplied beyond necessity. Commit yourself only to what you absolutely need to have. Or put another way, parsimonious theories are better. Parsimonious meaning, right, cheaper, fewer commitments. The ones that have less. Basically, this was minimalism before there was minimalism, right? Does it spark joy? No? Get rid of it. Does it satisfy some ontological commitment you have to have? No? Shave it off. Yeah.
Is it like we did with the interpretation?
Very similar. Note, when we were doing interpretations, I suggested, right, do the minimum kinds of things. That was for practical purposes. This is a theoretical suggestion. This is actually a suggestion about which theories are better. Better theories are more parsimonious.
Sorry, what was parsimony?
Okay. It's fewer commitments, cheaper. Now, it's notable that cheapness can come in two different ways. And this is subtle, but it's important. We can talk about the difference between qualitative parsimoniousness and quantitative. This is where we need that type token distinction. Quantitative parsimony is literally just there are fewer entities of the same type. Qualitative parsimony commits to fewer types. So, quantitative is literally just count them. How many different tokens do you believe in? So you might compare theories in terms of just that pure number. How many different tokens, we don't care what they are, but how many different tokens do our theories believe in? Qualitative says, how many different types do you believe in? Now, the dance. Remember, I've talked to you about this kind of trading ontology for ideology versus the other way around. This distinction is at the heart of it. If you like ontology, if you have a big ontology, but a very light or small ideology, you will have a very high number of quantitative entities. You'll commit to a lot of things existing, but you will have a qualitative parsimonious theory. Very few types. Because the types will all be explained by your big-ass ontology. Lewis is a perfect example of this. Huge amounts of things, lots of possible worlds, these big, giant, concrete things, but he only believes in concrete things. And they explain everything. Quantitatively massive, qualitatively quite small. On the flip side, right, I think I jokingly told you about my friend who's a blobjectivist. Right? He only believes in one thing, that is the blobject. So quantitatively, extremely small. Qualitatively, well, he's got to believe in a hell of a lot of properties that thing has. And those can be, in a sense, different types of entities. He's going to have tons of different distinct properties.
If I understand correctly, Spinoza would qualitatively, the last one,
The second one, yeah.
the second one would be very small, and the first one would be very big.
Could be, yeah. I think this is where I just don't know enough about Spinoza to tell you properly. But yes, I would suspect, right? That what I really care about is, again, do we see the difference between the two, right? So quantitative is literally like, count me the number of things that you say are out there, don't care what type. Qualitative is, tell me what types do you think are there. Accounts of properties can be measured in terms of both. This is what we're going to come back to a couple times, but I just want to get all of this going. Okay? So again, all of this was back, please.
Just so that I understand correctly. For say we have black sweaters, then the quantitative parsimony is we have like 5 black sweaters, and then the qualitative parsimony is we have black. The blackness is
It will depend on how you carve that up, right? So you might have being black, being a sweater, or you just have one complex predicate that is being a black sweater. Again, what you have to do when you give me your theory is tell me what the predicates you have, what the entities you're quantifying over. And telling me that full theory will then tell me how I can evaluate it quantitatively and qualitatively.
Then you reduce it, right?
If you want to get these lower, right? If you buy the razor point, your next move should be, can I get away with fewer things?
Yeah.
And again, what do you mean by fewer? Do you mean fewer types, fewer number, or both?
Or you can do both.
You could do both, right? You could do both. But you got to work for it. You got to work for it, right? Give some paraphrasing, these kinds of things. We've given tools that will help us do that. But again, we could see the broad idea of how all this fits together. Okay, so now let's pivot. Let's talk about, so again, this is sort of background. Let's talk about reasons why we might think properties exist. I'm going to give you 3 arguments. Here's the first argument, by far the most influential. We've already even run into it. This is the one over many argument. And we can put it this way. Something needs to explain why the following 3 sentences seem true. Okay. So sentence 1, the fire engine and the apple are the same color, presumably red. Sorry, this is very American-centric, right? But
I was read as well.
yeah. But it's useful just to say that. Second sentence, the fire engine and apple have something in common, namely that they're red. And then sentence 3, the fire engine and the apple resemble each other, namely in that they seem to both be red. So 1, 2, and 3 all seem true. And the argument is something needs to explain why they're true. Something needs to say why 1, 2, and 3 are true. And here's the big move. The existence of properties is the best explanation. Because properties are the things that can be shared. So there could be a cat in common. Properties are something that could explain resemblance. Right? Just to be the same color could be to just have the same color property. So we should believe that properties exist because they're the best explanation for why 1, 2, and 3 or similar sentences are true. There seems to be cases where there's one thing shared over many. We need to explain why that is. Best explanation. There are things, properties, that are shared. So some things to note about this argument. It is a kind of abductive argument. Right? That is, it's an inference to the best explanation. It's a challenge. Give me an explanation for why these sentences seem true. And then it says, the best explanation is the postulation of the existence of these things. These special extra entities that are properties. It doesn't tell us what properties are. It just says, hey, you should believe that these things exist, include them in your ontology, because they're the best explanation. Cool. So before we go on, questions about this argument? Do we sort of see the structure?
So it's not excludable.
What do we mean? What do you mean by it?
As in, if you exclude the information, the whole theory wouldn't stand anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if you say you don't think that 1, 2, and 3 are true, right, then you don't have any explanation to give. Right?
Okay.
I don't. What do you mean 1, 2, and 3 are true? I just don't. I don't see that, my dude.
To make it true, you just give the best explanation.
And of course, in order to even feel the force of the argument, you need to feel like 1, 2, and 3 need to be explained. This is a point we're going to come back to at the very end. One of the views we're going to talk about does exactly that. It just says, yeah, I don't think those need explanations. But again, this is by far the most influential argument to get you to believe in properties. It doesn't tell you what they are, just that you should believe they exist. You should commit to them. Okay, so here's our first one. I'm going to confess, the next two, well, the next one certainly is much weaker. Right? So here's the second big argument. It's a kind of reference argument. And it goes like this. Predicates like is red or is wise are meaningful. We can clearly use them in meaningful sentences. Right? Similarly, many abstract singular terms are meaningful. Redness, humility, wisdom. Right? To be meaningful, says the argument, there must be something that these linguistic items refer to or denote. If they don't refer or denote, then they're not meaningful. But they are meaningful. So there must be something that they refer to. Right? And properties are the best reference candidates. Again, a kind of abduction. But importantly, this one hinges on a very substantive linguistic assumption, or it's a very substantive semantic assumption. So again, the structure of this argument. Some predicates and some abstract singular terms are meaningful. To be meaningful, there must be something that these things refer to. So you should believe that properties exist because they're the best reference candidate. Okay. Before we go on to the third one, do we see the structure of the argument here? I think one thing to really note is, again, this argument hinges on a very substantive claim about meaningfulness and reference, which you might question. Something we'll talk especially about next week with sentences like, Santa wears a red coat. But, okay. So now, the third argument. The third argument, if this one hinges on an assumption about meaningfulness, the third argument hinges on you buying into the Quinean method for commitment. So here it is. A number of sentences, well, another typo, a number of sentences like the following are true. The dresses are of the same type. Acquired characteristics are never inherited. Humility seems to be, or humility, wisdom, and, prudence are 3 virtues. Virtues are better than vices, things like this. These sentences quantify over things like types, characteristics, ways, which are what properties are meant to be. And of course, whatever we quantify over, existentially, must be in our ontology. So, properties ought to be in our ontology. So, the third argument is basically, we take some sentences that on their face quantify over properties. Quine taught us that that means we're ontologically committed to properties. So, we're committed to properties. So 3 arguments to give us the existence of properties. We have the one over many. There are these sentences that seem to require some explanation. The best explanation is the postulation of properties. The reference argument. There are these abstract singular terms and predicates that seem to be meaningful. Meaningfulness requires reference. The only or best reference candidate are properties. And our last one, there are a number of sentences that seem to quantify over properties. Quantification is ontological commitment. Wang bang, you are ontologically committed to properties. Please.
And then the properties are the things we talk about, abstract or.
That's the next thing. None of these arguments tell us what they are. They just all try and push us into believing that properties exist. The next question is, cool, if you're telling me they are there, what are they? What do they like? What do they do? So I've got a couple questions. Yeah, go ahead.
The third argument to me seems to prove why property should be in our ontology and not. It doesn't seem to make a case for property.
Yeah. So importantly, they're all kind of just trying to get us to, we need to postulate something. Right? Exactly what it is still very much left open. And in many ways, you can kind of see the one over many argument as pushing you towards this. Hey, these sentences need explanation. What you really mean, my dude, is when you parse them out, it looks like they quantify over properties. Right? So that's another way to kind of read it. But yeah, I take it. Yes?
Could you repeat why we are committed to properties? Because of it?
Good. So for all three of them, or just this third one? Just this one. Okay. So let's take acquired characteristics, or let's take the dresses are of the same type. That's a good one, right? If we think about how we would express the dresses are of the same type into something like FOL, it looks like what we would need to say is that there is a type that all three dresses are instances of. Right? So we would need something like, let's use, I don't know, T, which really this should be a variable, right? So let's use, there's an X, which is a type, okay? And there's three dresses, okay, and these dresses are all instances of the T. But this is all we really need to get going. Because as soon as you do this, according to the ontological commitment stuff we talked about a few weeks ago, you're committed to properties. Because properties are meant to be these types, these characteristics, these ways. Another jokey way is there's two different ways to be Dutch, right? You could be a natural born citizen, or you could kind of pass the test and register as one. So that sounds like it quantifies over ways. That's the thought. As soon as you get to that kind of talk, according to the Quinean stuff we did before, you are ontologically committed. So again, three arguments. All of them push us into thinking that there are properties. None of them tell us what properties are, but they set kind of boundary conditions. And notably, it does in a way tell us what properties are, because they need to be the sort of things that we're quantifying over here. They need to be the sort of things that abstract singular terms or predicates refer to. And they need to be the things that explain resemblances, the commonalities, and when we say things like same color. Which is, again, the kind of intuitive thing that we started with. We were talking about what properties are meant to be. Okay. Good so far? Yes?
Say something like the fire engine and Apple have something in common. You could take existence, and existence is that a property?
Existence isn't a property. How do we express existence?
With the extension, so that does not has to make it a property, right?
Good. You're already seeing a way that we might push back on these arguments, right? Let's talk about this. We'll come back to that point because it'll be useful. So in some sense, what these arguments kind of gesture at is some jobs that properties are meant to do, right? They're meant to be shared or common amongst different objects, right? Different tokens are meant to share in this thing, this property. They're meant to mark similarities. They serve as a semantic value of predicates or abstract singular terms like wisdom or redness. They explain duplication. This is a notion we'll get to in 2 weeks when we think about identity. But really, this is going to be satisfying predicates. So then we're left with the question of if they exist, what kinds of things are they? What's the metaphysics of these entities? If they exist. Now, one thing to note, and we'll talk about this for 2 minutes before we take our break. Right? Every one of these arguments can be immediately resisted. We talked about how we might resist this first argument by just saying, yeah, a really flat-footed response with this is just, I don't think 1, 2, and 3 are true, let alone need an explanation. I think at best, 1 is just a really silly, roundabout way of saying, like, I don't know, some things about color perception maybe, or how people would play matchy-match games or something like this. 2, that's just rough talk. And 3, well, sure, but that doesn't say anything. Resemblance is cheap, right? Resemblance could be explained by, they both exist. Okay, that doesn't say anything interesting. Right? So there's an easy way to resist this. A really easy way to resist the second argument. Yeah, I just don't buy that middle premise. I think there's plenty of meaningful talk that doesn't require something to be there. The Greeks worshipped Zeus. There is no Zeus, sorry. Still meaningful. Sounds to me like the Greeks worship Zeus is meaningful despite the fact that Zeus has no reference. Next question. Right. Again, ways to push back on these arguments. And then the last one is you might paraphrase these away. This was indeed the whole point of some of the moves we could make with regards to ontological commitment. Right? So this is coming back to what you were saying. There are immediate ways to push back on these. But at least on their surface, they motivate existence and commitment to properties. And all the would-be property theorist needs is for even one of these to succeed. Right? Okay. So we doing good? We good? Sensible where we are? Where we ended up? Right? So the big question is, if they exist, what sort of thing are they? And the big split here is going to be between realists and nominalists. Realists think properties are what we're going to call universals. They disagree about what universals are, but they think that properties are universals. Nominalists basically say properties, if they exist, are not universals. They're some other kind of basic entity. So that's what we're going to talk about when we come back. We're at 33, 34. Why don't we go take a break to 45? So 11 minutes. Is that okay? Cool. Come back then and we'll rock and roll. Oh, shit.